You wrote a blog post that's really interesting in September 2020 titled Coinbase is a mission focused company, like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, one interesting thing you said in that blog post is that we're not going to be distracted by sort of activism within the company that's not related to the mission of the company. Now, that's a rare thing for a company to state, for a company CEO to state, especially in this climate. Um, can you, first of all, describe in a little more detail what you meant? Did you receive blowback for this?
I definitely received some blowback, but yeah, I'll describe what I meant. And if you want to talk about how it came to that too, we can talk about that. But what I meant is that there's a lot of companies right now, including tech companies, but not exclusively, where, um, I think like great companies, they have an important mission. They're trying to do something really good for the world. And unfortunately, they're getting a little distracted from that at times because of employee activism that is causing the company to basically jump into whatever the current thing is and try to help is like the positive interpretation. The negative interpretation would be to virtue signal. And my view is that this is actually kind of destructive to, this is largely an American company phenomenon, by the way. I do worry that this is making America less competitive. Even though I think of myself as kind of internationally minded, but I am a U.S. citizen, have my whole life here. So, when we put out this statement, we had employees that were not in the U.S. who were confused by it. They were like, "Why did Brian need to say that? We're just saying you're going to focus on work at work. That's what we were doing already."
Yeah.
And there was certain pockets of the U.S., certain cities, in particular, where we had employees that a very peculiar cultural phenomenon had evolved where I think people really wanted the company they worked at to be, almost acting like the government or something, and like trying to solve the hardest societal issues and at least have an opinion on it, if not contribute to the solution on almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I kind of, it was a very uncomfortable situation for me as a CEO. I'd never quite been in this situation where most of the time when employees in the past were kind of asking me questions, they would be asking about like, how do we make this product better? Like, what do we do with this competitor? What about this regulator? And it got to a place around that time where most of the questions we were receiving were, I think, even about things not related to the company. They were about broader societal issues like, Brian, what's your stance on XYZ controversial thing? And, I often like didn't have an opinion on these really hard questions, right? And I felt like it was distracting the company. People internally were getting into fights a lot too, like disagreeing with each other. There was a thing where like the social Slack internally was turning into social media almost, with people putting flame wars. So, and this culminated, by the way, with a walkout that happened in the company. We had received like some demands from employee groups about various things, and there was like basically an antagonistic thing with management and employee. And I was like, we're all on the same team here.
Yeah.
If you want to be antagonistic, let's do it with somebody else outside the company, that we're trying to improve the world in that dimension. So yeah, eventually I was like, okay, the company is not aligned on this. I just don't feel, I don't like the job as CEO, frankly. Like if the job is to come in here every day and like have to squirm in front of like the most difficult societal questions, I don't think I want to do that job. So like either they're going to have to go or I'm going to have to go. And I founded this company and I really believe in the mission, so they're going to have to go. And what I realized was that, so I made an exit package available to anybody who wasn't on board with this direction. 5% of employees took it. I got the company realigned towards this mission. We're all here to do work. By the way, people can go do anything like political or social activism outside of work. It's totally fine. Like everybody has stuff like that in their personal life. But while at work, we can also disagree at work, by the way, on the work. This is not like a no disagreement culture. Like let's try to get the truth. But don't bring stuff into work that's just going to create division. Make the workplace a refuge from division about all these crazy things. And like, we're all aligned here to work on the mission. Let's do that.
Yeah, that was really, really, really refreshing to hear. So this is me speaking, but there's a sense when companies take on these issues publicly from a CEO position or anywhere else, that it does seem to optimize for virtue signaling versus solving a particular problem. Because to solve a particular problem, you really have to really put in a huge, you have to hire a huge number of, you basically have to
Yeah.
create a company within a
Yeah.
company to take on a particular thing.
Right.
But if you allow yourself to internally care about a particular issue, you're basically pacifying some number of employee, like making sure Slack doesn't get out of hand. And then you're doing this kind of, from my perspective, especially on issues I care about, fake virtue signaling, basically trying to understand what will make me look the best, what would make the company look the best in this particular aspect. And it just seems very shallow, and it's optimizing for the wrong thing, not for the solving of the problems,
Yeah.
but for the making yourself look like the good guy and trying to then leverage that to say I'm the good guy in all situations. And it just it's the wrong thing. And perhaps from your perspective as a CEO, as a leader, it's also creating division, unnecessary division within people. Like they get, yeah, there's something about us, we get extremely argumentative about certain topics. They really bring out the emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, as you were saying, that emotion is even probably okay, maybe productive, when that emotion has to do with the mission of the company.
Yeah.
Like you really care about those disagreements versus like something that has nothing to do with a particular, with increasing economic freedom using crypto. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it was so refreshing because it's rare. Why do you think
Yeah.
that's a rare? So the city you're mentioning, I mean, there's a bunch of cities, but San Francisco is one such city when that culture, and it's sad because San Francisco is also, the Bay Area is also the hub historically of some of the greatest innovation in human history.
Yeah.
So that there's that tension. How did that culture emerge there, where like the innovation was done by people that are very mission driven? You get a bunch of smart people together to solve a difficult problem. They get maybe sometimes too much blinders on, but they try to balance that, and because it requires that focus to solve an actual problem. And yet that's also the place where this culture emerged. It's a fascinating human dynamic. I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody will one day tell the history of Silicon Valley, not just the innovation, but the social dynamics that occurred there. Anyway, why do you think that's so rare?
Well, because people don't want to get attacked. It's like super, you don't want to get canceled, right? It's super uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be called a racist or whatever, people want to say on Twitter. So,
Did you get attacked?
Yeah, I definitely got attacked. I mean, and I knew it would be controversial. The only reason I did it, frankly, was that I was kind of at my wit's end. I was like, well, like I said earlier, like the CEO job sucks. Like either I don't want to do it or they have to go, and I'm going to make the company into something that I want. And I'd spent 8 or 9 years of my life at that point kind of building this thing. I was like, well, I could go start another company, but it takes a long time to get momentum with these things. And Coinbase is a very rare thing that happened in the world. I feel very passionate about it. So, I'm not going to go. Like, I need to make this the company that I want to work at. And what was really interesting was that there was such a huge outpouring of support. So I knew that it would be controversial and I would get attacked. And predictably, there was some journalists and New York Times and all these people who kind of like went and started writing hit pieces on the company shortly thereafter, and they basically just call people who've left the company and can get quotes on whatever they want, and then they'll write a story. So mainstream media, I lost a lot of trust in mainstream media, frankly, after that. And of course, it's kind of become obvious since then that most mainstream media is like hyper politicized at this point. It's basically either super left or super right, and it's not really that focused on truth. So that's kind of unfortunate because I think journalism is actually like really important in society. So that whole thing got eroded in the US. Luckily, there's sort of new media, people like you, and a whole bunch of people.
Did that blog post help? That statement, the 95 people that remained, is this still something you struggle with? Because it's also a culture of the broader tech space.
Okay, so that was an interesting thing, which was that, so the 95% of people stayed. I got a huge outpouring of support from people who said, thank God you finally spoke up and said something, because frankly, it was making it not a very fun place to work either. And I realized that I think Nassim Taleb has this blog post about the tyranny of the 1% or something like that. But there's basically a relatively small group, 1-5% or something like that, that is really upset about something. It's not the majority of the company. It's like 5%. There's another 15% or something that are sympathetic to the cause. They're actually somewhat suggestible. They will go along with whatever, because it sounds reasonable. These are like real issues they're talking about. It's not to say that it's not real. And they'll kind of get swept up in it. But there's an 80% of the company that basically doesn't agree or just wants to get their work done without all this drama or distraction. And they're afraid to speak up, because if they speak up, they're afraid of being, again, called a racist, like fired, ostracized amongst their peers. And so it did require it to get to a bad enough place for me to finally say, you know what, I feel like I have to do this. Live through the short-term attacks of the press, which ultimately was very freeing for me, because now I don't really care. And now I can actually just build the company that I want to build without like caring about that. So, and then what was cool was a lot of really great people reached out to the Coinbase too after that, and were like, I'm an early engineer at Google or wherever, and like this culture has gotten kind of messed up, and like I want to work at a company that's willing to stand for that. And so we've gotten a lot of good people come over. Basically what I realized, and by the way, our diversity numbers and all that stuff, like people told me when I was drafting this post, they're like, don't post this. You're like, people, underrepresented groups will never want to work at this company again. And I was like, I don't think that's true. Like I talked to like our ERG groups, and they're not telling me they care about this stuff that much. They're telling me they just want to like be respected at work and do good work and contribute. So my gut was telling me that advice was wrong. And like, I can tell you a year after doing it, like our diversity numbers are basically either the same or better in every category. So that turned out to be false. Look, I hate to be like polarizing in either dimension here. Like I just want to get good work done and build good stuff with technology. So, I think companies should just have like reasonable policies. Like you want to get rid of bias in hiring. You want to attract great people from all different backgrounds. Like, we have Pledge 1%. We put 1% of the company equity into a foundation. Like, I hope we're able to do good stuff with that. That's, give back in some way. But like the main message, I guess, for me is like the core mission, the core work that we're doing on economic freedom and just all of our products that is like the main value that we're contributing in the world. Like, let's just do that more. And hopefully we can get from 89 million verified users to 1 billion or whatever. And then, I just think that's how we'll have the biggest impact.
It's tempting though. It's so interesting how companies get tempted to help.
Yeah.
It's like, and you step in, and it's almost like a drug, and then you forget. I mean, like all of us in life, it doesn't have to be companies. You get distracted.
Yeah.
And maintaining focus, like you're absolutely right. The way for Coinbase to add value to the world is to maximize the mission that it's on, not other stuff. And when you get wealthier and more successful, it becomes more and more tempting to just help out in some other shallow ways. And it's fascinating. And you just kind of brought that to light. So it was very refreshing. And it shouldn't be controversial to sort of focus on just getting stuff done.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, do you think that all these things tie together? There's like a general trend of like more censorship, there's like more cancel culture. There's some of these like freedom values are kind of, even like freezing people's accounts, like the trucker thing that happened. And it seems like there's a general trend of more authoritarian, policies there. But do you think do you feel like the tide is turning on that? Like there's counterexamples to it we've seen recently.
Yeah. I think it's the last gasp of old way of doing things. And so there's desperation and so on. Because to be fair, it's kind of the internet, which is where is the source of a lot of this, where people have a voice, is making the power centers of the world really nervous. And so that's where that's coming from, I think. And the internet is tricky. It's weird. It's full of bots.
Yeah.
It's full of like misinformation of all kinds. Yeah. Full of large groups with conspiracy theories and so on. And I mean misinformation broadly. People are misusing the word misinformation. They're just governments are just labeling random things with misinformation just to censor them. But I just think it's just like a new world where the internet is really finally taking hold, where there's billions of devices and everybody has a voice, it's almost basically governments and powerful people are slightly losing hold of power, and they're starting to freak out a little bit. That's it. And
Yeah.
so, and then once you have young people that are coming up now gain power, I think will rebalance everything. And then there's, yeah, like you said, promising signs that it's obvious that the majority of people want freedom, and that means a lot of things. That means economic freedom. That means freedom to have a voice, freedom to move around, freedom to act in the way they, without reasonable sort of limitations by people that don't have their best interest. And I gain more hope from just regular people that are fighting and like demanding the being able to have freedom of speech, or more specifically, sort of resisting crude overreach of government in the acts of censorship, at least in the United States. And hopefully that percolates out to the rest of the world that's struggling on a much more basic level, where people are being put in prison for the words they say, not just banned from Twitter.
Right.